Hi, Scott Harris King, and in this video I wanted to show off another part of my collection and talk about what is traditionally my favorite comic book series, the Avengers. Now that comes with a little bit of an asterisk, only that, for the first 15, 20 years of my collecting life, Avengers was my focus. I loved the Avengers. But around the year 2000, I started getting into some other books and sort of moving a little bit away from superhero books. And by the time Disassembled kind of finished me off in the new Avengers, and that kind of killed my interest in the series. So um, I still have a huge love for the original series, though. I do have a complete run of all 502 issues, plus all annuals, full run of West Coast Avengers, a full run of Solo Avengers, a full run of Avengers Unplugged, basically everything up until the late 90s. I've got just about every Avengers crossover up to that point as well. And I thought it would be cool to show you the first 100 issues of Avengers and tell you the stories behind it. So, the quick story behind the collection as a whole. This was my first issue of Avengers. It's 256. Of course, when I bought it, it wasn't autographed by Roger Stern, but I was lucky enough to meet him. I've managed to meet just about all of the major Avengers writers and some of the artists over the years. I was, of course, immediately drawn in by this amazing John Buscema cover and bought this. And Avengers pretty quickly became one of my favorite titles. It was this and John Byrne's Fantastic Four. And I found myself buying more and more back issues of both of those titles. And I was kind of really not sure. I had a very limited budget at the time. This is when I was still in middle school in the mid 80s. So I didn't have much money. I had a small allowance. And so I just wasn't sure how I was ever going to really get what I wanted. So my dad talked to me about it and he gave me some really great advice. He said that I should pick one of the series and focus just on that one. And then once I was done with that, I could then move on to another one. So I remember sitting down on my bed and I had all of my Avengers issues, which was about 20 of them at that point, and I had about 20 issues of Fantastic Four. I spread them out on my bed and I sort of thought through like which stories. I did have some back issues at this point, smattering from different time periods because I always liked old stuff. And I was like, which ones of these do I really like the stories, the characters? But I also, there was a collecting element to it, even, at a very early age and very early in my comic book experience. I'd just gotten my first price guide, which was price guide number 16 from 1986. And I looked through all the prices, and at that point, I think a Fantastic Four number one in near mint was going for like $1,500, and Avengers number one in near mint was $400. And as a kid with very little money, I thought, Avengers seems at least possible, but Fantastic Four just seemed out of my league. Fantastic Four, all of the early prices were similarly scaled compared to the early Avengers issues, and Avengers was just cheaper overall, but it did have keys, that appealed to me as a collector. I didn't want to just get a run where everything's cheap and there's nothing, of collectible interest in it. I wanted there to be a challenge. I wanted there to be key issues that I had to work for to hunt down. So I decided on that day that I was going to focus on collecting Avengers. Again, this was in 1986. I had just turned 14 at the time. Or I just turned 13 at the time. And I managed to complete my run of Avengers in just about 4 years. I think I finished my Avengers run around 1990. So it took me about 4 years working with my allowance, basically, and a couple odd jobs. It took me that long to scrape it up. And I'll go through all the books. I'll tell you the stories behind them. Some of them don't have a lot of stories, other ones do. I will say that the most I paid for any individual back issue during my initial collecting of Avengers was $33. I managed to get almost the entire run for probably $10 or less. There was only a couple issues where I had to go above the $10 mark, and I'll talk about that when I show off all the individual issues. So we're going to jump right in with Avengers number 1 through 100, and I really appreciate you joining me. I hope you find these comics to be as awesome as I do. So here's my copy of Avengers number 1. As you can see, it's a CGC 3.0. And I talked at some length about my copy of Avengers number 1 when I did my top 50 books video. There's a couple other ones in this first Avengers 100 that also made that video. So I won't go on in as much detail here, since I know a lot of you have already seen that video. But basically, I got this for my 14th birthday in 1987. The situation was that my dad had been looking at this old car that he was thinking about getting me to restore. I think it was a 1951 I forget now. I think it was I don't think it was a Willys Jeep. I think it was a 51 Kaiser Wilhelm. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And I wasn't very technologically or mechanically advanced. I'm not really good. I'm not really handy with tools. And we happened to be at the mall right around this time when we were thinking about getting this junked up old car to fix. And there was a dealer at a little mini show in the mall that had this copy for $80. And I talked to my parents. I really, really wanted it, of course. And they basically said, you can have one or the other. You can either have the car or you can have the comic. And I chose the comic over the car. I later met Stan Lee in 1989. I got this signed on the inside front cover. And many years later, in about 2009, I did this little thing online where I was trying to get the title of Fearless Front Facer, which was an MMMS title that you could only get by Stan Lee himself bestowing it on you. I happened to know someone that was friends with Stan Lee, and so I recorded a video and I sent it to them talking about my love of Avengers and choosing the comic over the car. And I got an email from Stan Lee officially proclaiming me as a Fearless Front Facer. So this holds a lot of sentimental value for me. Certainly holds some monetary value as well, but my sentimental value is a lot higher. So this would probably be the last book that I would ever get rid of. I will say that it was priced at $80. Of course, it was a birthday present, so I didn't pay anything for it. And I was very surprised when I got this back from CGC that it came back as a 3.0. I had it encapsulated for insurance purposes, and I'm glad I did, because I had this as a 2.0. And price-wise, the difference between a 2.0 and a 3.0 is pretty significant. So, yeah, that's my story behind my beloved copy of Avengers number 1. So here's my copy of Avengers number 2. I'm trying to hold these so that they don't get as much glare off of the light. This is my second copy of Avengers number 2. I was very lucky when I was a kid, about 13, when I really, really got into comics hardcore in 1986. As I remember it, it could have been as early as 85, because that's when I first really got into comics, but either 85 or 86, a good friend of mine by the name of Jason, he lived in Michigan, but he would come out to New England every summer to visit his grandparents, and he got into comics at the same time, and we were both super hardcore. Every week when the new comics came out, we would get on the phone and we'd talk about all the new issues of the comic, and it's really a treasured memory for me. His favorite series was also Avengers, so when I was trying to put together my complete run of Avengers, he at the same time was trying to put together his complete run of Avengers. And so it wasn't really a competition. It was just really cool to be able to talk about that very specific interest with someone else. I finished my run. He came very close, but never actually completed his. But I had a lower grade copy of Avengers number 2 that I paid $10 for at a convention. And eventually I saw this copy at my LCS, and it was priced at $69, and I decided to upgrade. So I didn't have that much money, so I put it like on a layaway, and I'd pay like $10 every time I went into the store. And so over a period of months, I managed to buy this, and I gave that other copy, the $10 copy, to Jason for his collection. Now this copy, um, unfortunately, it has an extra staple. I don't think there's any way to show it to you, but it's basically, or it's got like two extra staples that were added. There, you can see they're shiny. Where did it go? They're like they really jump out because they're too shiny for the book. Um, so that is something which, when I bought this in the mid 80s or late 80s, I guess, got this in the late 80s, it wasn't quite as big a deal as it is now. Now, of course, this would be considered a qualified book, or so it's frustrating, um, because again, the price difference at the time would have been minor, and it's much more pronounced now. If I wanted to get a similar copy, but without the shiny staples, it would cost me twice as much as the book with the shiny staples. So it's a little disappointing, but it's still a nice looking copy of Avengers number 2, and you can't really complain about that. So here's my copy of Avengers number 3. It's about a 3.0, maybe 3.5 if you're being a little generous. It's a nice solid book, and my story behind this is that I paid $20 for it in the late 80s. Most of these books I got, again, between 86 and 90, except for the ones that I've upgraded, which I'll, of course, talk about. This one I've never upgraded, so I got it probably 87 or 88. We used to have this store in Worcester, that was this sort of classic old school comic store. There were these two guys that would run in front of the store that were, had the big bellies with the tight shirts, and like sort of the slick back unwashed hair and the thick glasses, and they had these reams and reams of comics, just like huge room full of comics that were stuffed into these cardboard boxes, like these old, like, corrugated moving cardboard boxes. The prices were good, the grading not so much. And then the front half of the store was a science fiction fantasy bookstore. So it's just like a classic, like right out of the movies, situation. I got a lot of great comics there, and this is one of them. It's probably the coolest one that I still have, although I do have a nice high grade Jonah Hex number 1 that I got there for like $1.50. But yeah, so this is my Avengers number 3. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of that store. It closed down in the 90s, and if you go there now, I think there's like a Spanish church there or something. So that was too bad. When I was growing up, there were 3 different comic stores in Worcester, and now there's one. But the one that's left is still awesome. So here is my copy of Avengers number 4. Again, I spoke at some length about this in my top 50 videos. The short version is that this is one of the first back issues I got. I was always, whenever we went to comic stores, when I first got into collecting, I wanted to get the oldest comics that they had. And so pretty early on in my collecting, we went to this comic store in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. It's called Same Bat Channel. And Same Bat Channel was this, they had a great placement, because coming into town, you'd come up over this hill, and when you got to the top of the hill and started down, you could see the center of the city down below. And they had a gigantic Batman logo on their awning, and this is the new look with the yellow circle. So it was just like the bat signal was calling you to come down to the comic store. Um, Unfortunately, they got sued or had a copyright infringement cease and desist when the movie came out in '89, and they had to get rid of that. But long before that, I went there with my father, and they had this wrecked copy of Avengers #4. It's probably a 1.0 in my opinion. Um, but it was $12.50, which I didn't have, and so my dad bought it for me. And we got home, and I read it a couple times, but I was worried that it was so brittle because of the spine in particular was falling apart down at the bottom half, that if I kept reading it, which I wanted to do, that it would damage the book. So we came up with the solution of using rubber cement to glue the cover to the spine, and it still holds. That's not going anywhere. So I don't recommend doing that. But this book has a lot of sentimental value to me. Every time I see it or just think about Avengers 4, I think of my dad and how much he supported my comic collecting habits. So that's the story behind my Avengers #4, which I love. It's possible at some point I might get an upgrade, but if I do, I'd still never get rid of this one. Um, I would just have two copies, but I've never really felt the need to do that. So here's my copy of Avengers 5. It's a nice, solid, lower grade book. It's probably a 4.5. Um, Maybe creeping up even into the 5 range. I paid $10 for this, and um, this was part of a huge batch of Avengers that I bought. A lot of the comics we're going to be seeing, particularly in the second half of the run, up in the like 66 to 100 range, I got all at once. And there was a guy in Boston who was advertising, like in the want ad, or the classifieds, that he was selling comics. And I had some money. So this must have been probably the beginning of '87, because for Christmas '86, my parents gave my brother and I each like a couple $100 that we were supposed to invest. And this is going to come up a couple times because I invested most of that money in this run of Avengers. And so we ended up my dad drove me into Boston, and we went up to this guy's house, up into his attic, and he had like complete runs of Marvel books back to about 65 or so, with a smattering of earlier issues. And this is the earliest of the Avengers books that I got. It was $10. Um, and I've never seen any reason to upgrade it. Um, yeah, I love this book. Here's my Avengers #6. First Masters of Evil, tied with Sergeant Fury #8 for the first appearance of Zemo. And this is the second copy of this I've owned. The first copy I bought for like $4 or something at a convention. Is absolute trashed, but it was complete. So I was able to check it off my checklist, and more importantly, I was able to read the story because at that point I didn't have any reprints of these. So buying the originals was the only way to read the stories. Um, but later on, I went through a phase around between like 90 and 92 where I was upgrading some of my really rough copies of Avengers, and I did upgrade as well as the #2. I upgraded this #6. I think I paid I want to say I paid about $28 for this, and it's a lower mid-grade copy. It's probably a 4 maybe. So I'm happy with that. Here's my copy of #7. It looks great. It looks like it's a 7.5 or so, which is what it was advertised at when I got it. It actually has some technical flaws, particularly on the back cover. There's some damage on the back cover, so I personally wouldn't have this higher than like a 5.5. And that's a bit disappointing. But I got issue 7 at the same time as I got issue 8. So here's issue 8. See if I can do this. Yeah, so here's my 7 and my 8. The 8's much higher. I have it at about an 8.0. And I told the story in my top 50 comics video, but the story behind these two issues is that around 88 or going into 89, I bought up at this tiny comic store way up in Holton, Maine, which is like 8 hours north of Boston. I found this high grade copy of Batman 171 with the first Silver Age Riddler. And I bought it for $20, and I ended up trading it at a show for a high grade copies of Amazing Spider-Man 39 and 40. And then at another show, I traded those two books for these here. I previously had a low grade copy of 7 that I think I paid like $8 for. It was really beat up. Not as bad as my earlier copy of 6, but pretty bad. This is actually the third copy of Avengers 8 that I've had. The first one I had was totally miscut. It was missing like a whole inch off the bottom, off the off of this side, and it was cut diagonally to the point where it actually cut into the art on some panels. And then I upgraded from that to another copy that I still didn't pay more than like $15 for. And then once I got this, I gave one of those copies to my friend Jason that I mentioned earlier, so he would be able to fill that hole in his collection. So here's my copy of Avengers number 9, the first appearance of Wonder Man. There's not really much of a story behind this one. I got it at a convention. I paid $10 for it. And its lower grade is probably a 3, but it's solid, and I've never felt the need to upgrade from it. I'm perfectly happy with this copy. And just some trivia for you. If you look online, there's a cool video with an interview with George R.R. Martin where he's talking about Game of Thrones, and he talks about how much this issue influenced him, and how this sort of taught him that it was that killing off your characters had like a major emotional impact, because it did for him when he read this. And he cites this comic as one of his big writing influences when doing Game of Thrones. I think he actually has a letter about this issue that's published in issue 12 as well. So that's just a little cool trivia about Avengers number 9. And finally, here's Avengers number 10. This is one of the books that I actually paid more for. I got almost everything in the run for $10 or less. And again, I have upgraded several of them since for more. But this one I think I paid $22.50 for. It's a solid mid-grade book. It's probably a 4.5 or a 5.0. And I got this at one of the shops in Fitchburg. There were actually 2 stores at that time that were like literally like 2 storefronts away from each other. There's Same Bat Channel, which I mentioned earlier. They were eventually purchased by That's Entertainment in Worcester and became like a franchise. And the other one was called Great Expectations. There's a guy named Pete that ran that store who is really cool. I actually worked there a little bit, sorting through his comics, and was paid with comics, which is, the dream come true. I don't remember which of the stores I got this at. It might have been Great Expectations, but anyway, it was $22.50, and that's on the higher end. We're gonna get into some books here. Strangely enough, the period of the book that I paid the most for is issues 10 to 16. So a lot of these ones coming up are books that I paid a little bit more money for. So here's Avengers number 11, supposedly co-starring Spider-Man. He's actually not in very much of this, though Kang does build a Spider-Man robot. I don't have a real big story about this specifically, but we're going to see these next few issues are some of my highest graded. copies of in my collection, and they were also some of the last ones that I got. For whatever reason, I when I was putting my run together, I got to the point where I had most of the first 10 issues, but I was missing like issues 11 through 15. And when I found them, they happened to mostly be higher grade copies. So this area here from issues 10 to 16 is actually strangely enough, the part of my Avengers run that cost me the most at the time. Just sort of happenstance. If I had found lower grade copies when I was collecting, I would have bought those, but I happened to find the higher grade ones first, and I picked them up. This one was $25. I got it at a show in the late '80s. It's got crease here. It's color breaking till down about here, and then it becomes non-color breaking. That's about it. So I think even with that, this is probably a 6.5, edging towards 7. So it's a nice copy. Um, it's not quite as nice though as my number 12. My number 12 is probably my nicest issue of Avengers. This is probably an 8.5, might even be a 9. I've got a couple in this period here. And this is the comic that I paid the most for when I was putting my collection together. I got this at the Great Expectations store in Fitchburg. I got several of them there. They got in a high grade run of Avengers. This was $33.50. And yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. Several of these, they're just like, those like they were just printed, super glossy, bright colors, just excellent, excellent shape. Here's my 13. This was actually not part of this group of comics that I got um, from this batch from the Great Expectations. It's a slightly lower grade, but it's still really nice. It's probably a 6 or maybe a little bit higher. And I honestly don't remember what I paid for it. I just remember that I had this one before I got the other ones. I don't think I paid much for it. My guess is $10, but that's kind of a guess. This is some of these early ones. I have pretty good memory for how much I paid for them. This one, I don't really recall. Cool story though. One of my favorite early stories. Here's a really high grade copy, number 14. It has a couple nicks or little chips along the top edge. And that is pretty much it. It's just absolutely gorgeous right off the press. Just like the inks are just super bright. Again, this was part of this group that I got from Great Expectations. I think I paid $30 for this at the time, and certainly don't regret it, even though the story is really stupid. Here's my 15. It's a little bit lower grade. It's more in the 7.5 range probably, but it's still really tight and clean. And again, I got this in this same batch. I think that I had a lower grade copy and this was an upgrade, but I'm actually not even sure about that. I know at one point I had another copy of this that I gave to another Avengers fan, um, but so I'm guessing this was an upgrade. And again, this was around $30 for this. Here's my 16, and it looks like an 8.5 or even a 9, but it isn't. Unfortunately, if you look really close at the edge here, there is water damage right here, and it goes onto the back cover and it's stained like a dark brown. This is one of my big regrets, because back in the day, this is sort of like the extra staple, or I mean those replacement staples or whatever it is in the Avengers 2 with the shiny staples. This defect, while certainly notable, wasn't hammered as much in terms of grading and cost at the time as it is now. There was also much less of a, right now the curve for the price goes like this. It goes shooting up at the end. It was a much more gradual sort of linear acceleration in terms of the pricing. So the difference between a very fine and a near mint was just like the difference between a fine and a very fine. It didn't have this huge upswing. When I got this, I paid $20 for it at Great Expectation. They had another copy that was probably an 8.5 or 9, but did not have the water stain. And it was $25. It was $5 more. But for a kid who was paying for this with my allowance, which was $5 a week, it meant a whole week's allowance that I could be buying other comic books with. So I decided to get this one. It's so gorgeous anyway, but of course nowadays, with the extensive staining on the back cover, this is probably technically only a 4 or so, even as amazing as the rest of the book looks. And so the price difference between this and the other one, back then it was only 25% more money. And now that's probably worth 10 times as much as this one. So I do regret not spending that extra $5. Had the exact same story with my Ghost Rider first appearance in Marvel Spotlight 5, where there was a copy that was 20 and another one that was 25. I bought the copy that was 20, which is about a 7.0. The one that was $5 more was probably a 9 or 9.2. So that's just the drawback, I guess, of being a little kid. You don't have the money, and you don't have the wisdom yet to, put the $25 one aside, put the $20 down payment on it, and then next week get it. And that like back issue of ROM or whatever the heck I wanted at that time that I wanted to buy with an extra $5, not that important. So starting with issue 17, I don't have a lot of stories because I have one big story that covers a lot of these comics. Well, 2. One of them is the when I went to that guy's house, because there are going to be a lot of issues later in the run that I bought at that same time. The other one, though, is here, and they have a similar origin. As I mentioned, Christmas in 1986, my parents gave my brother and I both a couple $100, which is a significant amount of money at the time, but also for us. Like, we were solidly middle class or lower middle class, so that was a lot of bread. And so I just threw in a little 60s slang for you because of the flavor of the time period. The caveat was we were supposed to invest it. Now, I don't know if my parents felt like I was actually taking that seriously because I spent almost all of it on my Avengers collection, but in retrospect, it turns out it's been a really good investment. The first thing I did with my money was I went to this comic book company. Now, this is like beginning of 1987, so there's no internet, there's nothing like that. But there's these advertisements in the comics, and one of them was advertising, I don't remember if it was that one place in New Jersey that had all those ads, but one of them had an ad for all these issues of Avengers, and among other things. And so I bought, they were missing a couple issues, but I ordered from them Avengers number 17 through 56 and 141 through 180. And again, they were missing a couple, but I got almost all of those all at once in a giant package, and I hadn't read any of them before. So you can just imagine being a 14-year-old and getting this delivery with Avengers 17 through 56 and 141 through 180 in it. It was just mind-blowing. It was just so amazing. Now, they were advertised as lower mid-grade books, sort of lower grade, and for the most part they are. This one here, 17, is actually super nice. It would probably be a 7.5 or an 8 even. Well, 7.5 at best. But it's got a pop-top staple, and that's a feature of a couple of these books here. When we get to 48, you'll see my first Dane Whitman as Black Knight is absolutely gorgeous, but it has a pop staple. So a lot of these issues I'm just gonna be showing pretty quickly here because they all have the same story. I got issues 17 to 56 all at the same time, although there's a couple that I've upgraded since then, so I'll discuss that when I get to them. Here's my 18. Again, advertised as being a lower grade, but it's solid mid grade, 5.5 or 6. So very happy with this. Avengers 19, this is actually a lower grade. It's more like a 4 or 4.5. And I have no problem with that. 4.5 to 5.5 is kind of my collecting wheelhouse. It's, they're solid books that you can read and that they look nice, but they also have a history to them, and they're so much cheaper than the higher grade books that's kind of where I'm most comfortable at. And I love The Swordsman. So happy with this. Great story. One of my favorites when I read through those. These issues were among my absolute favorites because, to be honest, a lot of the Avengers issues in that era aren't that great, particularly in the 30s and 40s. But this storyline is great, and here's a great Wally Wood cover. Again, solid mid-grade book, probably a 5.5 or 6. So most of these I don't have a lot of stories for, since these next like 30 issues or so are all from this same batch of comics that I got in the mail order. So I'm going to show them a little bit quicker, but I do want to give you a chance to look at them. Some of them do have at least some stories, though. For instance, this is my copy of Avengers number 21, and this is actually an upgrade. The previous version that I had a big, like a tape pull, those paper loss. So at some point in the early 90s, I bought this as an upgrade. I didn't notice at the time, though, that this has marker on the cover. So it's still an upgrade, but it's just one of those things where I wasn't paying attention, so it wasn't as big as an upgrade as I wanted. Here's issue 22. This is a cool two-part story. We get the first appearance of Power Man, who later becomes Atlas, in the Thunderbolts and stuff like that. He's around for a long time. It's a fun story. I do like the Caps Kooky Quartet era quite a bit. Speaking of which, this is probably the best story from the first many years of Avengers, in my opinion. I know there's people that really like the first 5 issues of the Search for Hulk stuff. That's really cool, but awesome cover. I love Kang. This 2-part story is one of my favorites. And again, these books here, they're all very solid mid-grade books. They were all advertised as being lower grade, but most of these are solid mid-grade, in the 4.5 to 6 range. So yeah, there's a number of these that are edging up towards 6. They're really nice, solid, tight comics, and I love having them. I've never liked this cover that much. There's issue 24. On the other hand, 25 has this great cover. I have great colors on this copy. It does have a lot of damage here to the spine. It's like scraping almost along the spine. So the technical grade on this one is again probably a mid grade, like a 4.5. But it looks much nicer, and it's just got these awesome eye popping colors on this great cover. The story's stupid as hell, but the cover is great. So here's my copy of issue 26. This is a little bit different. This was one of the few issues in the 17 to 56 run that the company I ordered from did not have in stock. So I bought this at a local comic store in Leominster, Massachusetts, where I was living at the time. And the comic store was called AOK Cards and Comics, and I think I paid $1.50 for this. It might have been $2.50, but I don't think so. I think it was $1.50, and it's got a subscription crease down the middle, so it's like a solid 4.5. But I loved AOK Cards and Comics. They had a huge Marvel. I don't remember them having a lot of DC, but in terms of Marvel, they had all these solid solid runs going back into the 66, 65 even, and the prices were really cheap. Again, this was the mid 80s, but yeah, so books like this were $1.50 or $2. I remember I got a Amazing Spider-Man 25 there for like $4 or something. Um, and at one point, I think it was probably in '88. I was into speculating, not like they mean today with new comics so much, although I did a little bit of that, but it was more, I was really up to date on the what was hot, what was not, books that were rising. So I remember I went up to AOK at one point, and I bought a copy of Incredible Hulk 181 from them. They wanted $12, but before I bought it, I looked through it and it was missing the Marvel value stamp, of course. So I talked them down to $6. So yeah, at one point I had the first appearance of the first appearance of Wolverine and Hulk 181 for $6. I also had issue 180, and I ended up selling both of them. I think I got $30 for 181, so I made good money on it at the time. Obviously, it would be nice to have that now, but I don't really like Wolverine. So here's my 27. Again, this same run of back issues. Never felt the need to upgrade most of these because they're all just really nice, solid, clean copies. Here's the first Goliath. It's also the first appearance of the Collector. And you'll notice here, it's weird, Giant Man, aka Goliath, obviously wasn't popular enough to have his own title, so they put him back in Avengers. And for some reason, Stan decided it was important to feature him on the cover of every issue once he came back. So there's like 5 or 6 issues here. I think there's one that doesn't have him, but he's just every cover is like, here's Goliath. And this is probably my favorite costume of his. But these issues are not that great in my personal opinion. Here's my number 30. Again, here's another Goliath cover, all from the same collection. 31. This one's a slightly lower grade than some of these other ones. Very forgettable storylines. Except for this one, the Sons of the Serpent story. This is a classic. Again, Goliath. Now, Goliath actually plays a role in this because this is a story about basically the Sons of the Serpent are the Marvel version of the Ku Klux Klan. So this is really bold and daring of Stan to do this anti-racism story right in the heart of the civil rights era. And this is the first appearance of Bill Foster, who later goes on to become Black Goliath. And the story is about him as Hank Pym's assistant gets attacked by the Sons of the Serpent. Really, really great storyline. Here's the next part, number 33. Again, these are all 4.5, 5, 5.5. And again, you'll notice more Goliath every single cover. This is one of my least favorite eras of the first like 20 years or so on the book. I find the coloring to be kind of gray and dank on a lot of these. A lot of them have these like we'll see in 36. There's just the background. I don't know. There's just things don't really pop. There's a bit of sketchiness to the inking on the Don Heck art that sort of lends itself to that as well. It's just everything's kind of murky except for this next one. Now this is the one that I actually did upgrade. Here's issue 35. I had my copy. I forget what was wrong with it, but it was kind of messed up. So at some point down the line, I upgraded to a sharper copy with these bright reds. And so yeah, this is a nice copy of this, and it's one of the few in this era that isn't just kind of a little bit murky and dank. 36. So this is not the first copy of 36 that I had. 36 was actually the first real back issue of Avengers I got. The first time I ever went to a comic store is probably in 1985. My dad took me over to this store in Ayer, Massachusetts, which at the time was by Fort Devens military base. So they had like a bunch of interesting stores there to serve the military outpost. And I don't remember the name of the place, but it was the first comic store I ever went to. I wanted to get the oldest comics that I could get, and the titles, as I mentioned at the beginning, that I was really into at the time was Fantastic Four and Avengers. So I got a Fantastic Four 61, and I got a copy of Avengers 36, and didn't really like either of them. I thought the 36 here in particular was really boring. Um, Much more interesting is on the way out the door, they had this box on the floor with a 25-cent comics. And again, I wanted to just get the oldest things I could get, so I grabbed the oldest comics out of that box for a quarter each. And that was Flash 137 with the first Silver Age appearance of the Justice Society, and the Atlas Amazing Adventures #6 with Dr. Droom. No, long gone, both of those. Once 137 took off, I ended up selling it for $20 or $30. And the same with the Atlas. Like, I flipped that. I probably only got like 10 for that at the time, but I paid a quarter for both of them. So anyway, I traded away my original 36, but then once I got back into collecting Avengers, it came with that big run, so I was able to replace it. Here's 37, and again, 36 and 37, you can see this like gray, like I just do not like the look of the covers during this particular part of the run here. I think I've seen there was originally a different concept for the cover, and they had them redraw the cover, and it looks much better in the original art. I just really dislike that sort of gray tone. Here's where we finally get away from these Goliath covers, and they're like, Goliath? Not working. Let's try Hercules. Nice bright reds on this. This is a nice copy. It's probably a 6. Maybe a 6.5. It's a really nice bright copy, and it also has some classic Avengers floating heads. I love floating head covers where the faces are, most of these faces here are actually just staring blankly. Goliath seems really shocked that he's not more prominently featured on the cover for once. But we're going to see some really cool floating head covers coming later on. Here's 39. It's kind of a Hercules spotlight issue where the Avengers get captured and he has to rescue them. He's not actually a member of the team at this point. He's sort of just an unofficial hanger-on. This is notable for featuring the Mad Thinker's Triumvirate of Terror, which are like the stupidest supervillains probably in the first 20 or 30 years of Avengers. There's a character that's one of the villains called Thunderboot. So I can't really recommend. Roy Thomas took over the book writing with issue 35, and his early work is extremely wordy, even for Roy Thomas, and he's trying very hard to write as much like Stan Lee as he can. And the results just are not that great. It takes him a while to sort of grow into the book, and the plots start getting more interesting after a few issues. But we'll see in a little bit when it really starts picking up. Issue 40. We got a Goliath sighting, and also we get a Submariner guest appearance. Wish I had more to say about the comics themselves, but again, they're just about all solid mid-grade books. They're nice, they're tight, they're clean, but they're not high grade, they're not trashed. They're just really, really good books. And again, a lot of them do sort of creep up into the 6.5 range, which is great considering what I paid for them and that I got them in mail order without seeing any of them in bulk. And they were just like, I don't even think they were bagged. It was just like a pile of them that came in a box. Here's issue 41 with the Dragon Man. The story's getting a little more interesting. Roy's starting to plot a little better. His first few issues are not that great. But I do like the drama with the sort of the black, the night sky and the rain and stuff. It's kind of cool. This one's got a little bit of a scuff down here that brings it down a little bit, but it's still probably a 4.5. Continuing this same storyline. We got Goliath here. Hercules just doesn't really work in the book for me. Not at this point. He works a little bit better when he comes back during the Roger Stern run, but he's just kind of an awkward fit for the title here, and he's not really going to stick around all that long. Here's a book that's gotten a little bit of more play recently because it's the first appearance of Red Guardian, who is appearing in the Black Widow movie. And I really wish they'd done a Black Widow movie a few years ago, because for me, like, it just doesn't look that exciting, but I really like what it looks like they're doing with Red Guardian. I think that looks fun. And this story's actually pretty good, where we find, Roy has the Soviet version of Captain America that he introduces, and it turns out that it's the Black Widow's husband or ex-husband or whatever the situation is. Black Widow's been in several of these issues. This is the transitional period where she's no longer a straight villain. She's not exactly a superhero, but because she's dating Hawkeye at this point, she gets involved in a lot of the storylines, and it leads to this, which is a really cool issue. I really like this cover a lot. Not a huge fan of covers like this. Like 24 that I showed earlier also has a cover kind of like this, and I just don't like these sort of messy, massive crowd scene covers. This copy's a little bit lower grade. It's got some scuffing in the middle. Luckily, with the white cover, you don't see it as much. Here's a cool cover, a cool story. It was a one-off, the first appearance of the Super Adaptoid. Roy's starting to get a little better with the plots. Like, the Red Guardian stuff was cool. This is cool. It also brings back a holiday in the Marvel Universe called Avengers Day, which was first mentioned back in issue 22. They have it again here in this. Sorry, I said this is the first appearance of Super Adaptoid. I don't think it is, actually. He appeared in Tales of Suspense first, now that I am thinking about it. But this is his first appearance in Avengers, where he fights the whole team. It's a fun story. It's a cool cover. Here's my 46, a little bit lower grade. It's got an impacted staple here, and the bottom's all scuffed up. And, John Buscema's doing the artwork, but it's not really, he's not really at his peak yet. And the inking has something to do with that. And I think just the getting used to working on Marvel. The book is in the process of trying to get a little modernized, and it takes a while with Avengers between Roy Thomas's writing and the art, because he's writing it so densely, the art is also really dense. I'm not exactly sure which came first, chicken and egg sort of thing, because they were, I think, working at the Marvel style. But in a few issues, they really loosen up, and once the art loosens up, the writing loosens up, and vice versa, and you just have like one of the greatest runs in superhero comics history. We're not quite there yet, but this is an important and cool storyline here. This story, we get Magneto comes in, Magneto if you really want, comes in, and Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, who have been in the team since issue 16, end up leaving the book. And we get the first appearance of Dane Whitman in this issue. Next issue, he becomes Black Knight. And I like frame covers, and I love yellow covers. This one, instead of floating heads, they have little tiny floating bodies. Little tiny Avengers. Um, so I want to love this cover. I don't, but I do think it's kind of cool. So here we are with issue 48, the first Dane Whitman as the new Black Knight, with Black Knight being announced in the movie, blah, blah, blah. It's taken off and everything. This is one of the copies I received in this lot that was actually in much nicer shape, but like number 17, it's got a pop staple. So it's really unfortunate because I would have this copy at an 8.5 or even a 9. So it's like a qualified 9. The pop staple is a real bummer, but it's super tight, glossy, and great colors. I love the cover. I do like the Black Knight a lot, particularly in his early Avengers appearances. So this is one, the grades are kind of all over the place with this big bunch of comics, but yeah, I'm happy to have this one. 49 is the end of this 3-part storyline with Magneto and the introduction of the Black Knight. This is a cool cover. I just saw someone, like a professional, dissecting this cover, basically saying the coloring is a little weird because nowadays, Magneto would be much more prominent. They colored him so he's just sort of a dark menacing figure. You don't even necessarily know it's Magneto, because they've chosen to, put all of the coloring focus on Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. It's a bold looking cover, but yeah, if it was done today, they'd want you to know, hey, Magneto's in this because everybody loves Magneto. Yeah. Here's my copy number 50. Again, another nice mid-grade copy. This is a Hercules spotlight issue where he goes up to Olympus and something's happened to the gods, and then he's got to save them all. We're going to see Roy, in a very Roy move, reference his own work because he comes back to this same idea in issue 100. I think he liked the synergy of having it for the 50th and the 100th issue, both being about Hercules and the gods. Hercules leaves the group in this book, which for me is like, thank goodness. The other thing is, this book is Buscema, I believe he's inking himself, if I'm remembering this correctly. And so it has sort of a sketchy feel. For me, the book, in terms of the look and the feel, jumps from the early 60s to the late 60s and becomes much more modern beginning the next issue. So the jump from 50 to 51, this is inked by someone else. I think it's George Klein maybe, but it just looks smoother. There's not that sort of sketchiness that Heck and Buscema had both been bringing to the book for a while, and the coloring is just more assured. We don't have sort of these murky, grayish, whatever's going on in the backgrounds. And the stories, this story is The Collector, and it's not that great. I mean, it's fine, but the stories really start picking up in the next issue. I love yellow covers. This is a really nice copy, except it was dropped at some point. So the bottom corner here has a bunch of bends through the whole book, really, but mainly the cover. I might be able to get that pressed out. I don't think it's probably worth it, although the rest of the book is very nice. So without that, it's probably an 8. First appearance of the Grim Reaper. It's also the first issue where the Black Panther joins the team. And so it's an important issue for me. Starting with this issue, it's like the best year in Marvel superhero books. Every issue delivers. The Grim Reaper's costume in his first appearance here is absolutely hideous. It's just I don't know what they're thinking. When he comes back later and he's got the skull and crossbones and the all black, that's a cool costume. Like that's cool. That's bad costume, but I do love the yellow cover. Here's 53. If you're reading the comics, you also need X-Men 45 because it's a crossover. I have in my collection, don't have 45, but they reprinted that in I think in issue 90, might have been 93 of X-Men just before it went back to the new book. So I have the reprinted um, part of the X-Men story, and this is basically following what's been happening with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch since they left with Magneto at the end of issue 49. Um, so we got a nice Avengers versus X-Men story. Roy, I think, was writing both books at the time, and I find the X-Men before the new X-Men came out in the mid 70s. All just about every X-Men appearance before that is incredibly boring. Not boring though is Avengers 54 and 55. So here's Avengers 54. Love the cover, great story. Love the Black Knight. This is a nice copy, probably a 6. A lot of gloss, a lot of color. A lot of the books that I got in this batch were um, had very nice color and gloss. Like they had scuffing or defects or little creases, or like the other, like 52 is dropped. So they had a pop staple, but they look really nice and they're very clean and sharp. And this is a key book. It's the first appearance of Ultron. 55 is the one that's really taken off, which I sort of get, but in 54, he's in disguise as the Crimson Cowl. He appears on several pages and has lines of dialogue. We do also see him in his Ultron form, in the robot form at one point in the story. Um, More importantly, if you want the story, you have to have both issues anyway to get the whole story. So here's 55. This is a slightly lower grade copy. Um, Although a lot of that has to do with uh, it just not being a pure white anymore. It's hard to tell whether it's dirt or tanning. I would suspect it's more a little tanning. Here's another one of these crowd shots, which I'm not a big fan of. And we have Goliath front and center, but he's changed his color scheme to red and blue. I don't like this as much. I think the blue and yellow pops out a lot better. And great comic, great story. Um, the cover is a letdown. 56, again, solid mid-grade copy. Classic story where they use the time machine and they revisit the death of Bucky. This leads into Avengers Annual 2. I'm not showing off my annuals. I do have a complete run of annuals. But in Annual 2, when they're trying to come back, they get shunted to this alternate reality where the Scarlet Centurion is like taking over the world. And they end up fighting, if I remember right, they fight a version of the original Avengers lineup. But this is a really cool cover. Like it's a really nice cover. A lot of floating heads here, showing a lot of emotion. So that's always good. So yeah, this is another classic. This was the last of the issues in this lot that I got using my Christmas money from 1986. I had ordered 17 through 56. A couple of them, as I pointed out, were missing, like 26. But most of them were there, and this was the last of those. So that left me with a big hole. And I filled a lot of that. Like I was missing a lot of the issues between 57 and 139, basically. I had a couple which I'll get to when I get to them. But this is, the next year in 1987, I went to, with my dad, I told you when I was talking about issue 5, to this guy's house in Boston who was selling off his collection. And I got that issue 5. I got issues 57 and 58. and then I got a whole bunch of other ones that I'm going to show you. So that was sort of the second major acquisition in my collection, where I had gotten these two big um, runs, and then I got this huge run all at once from this guy, and most of his books were original owner books, and they had been bought by the guy off the stands, had been read a couple times, and so we're going to see a lot of them later are high grade books. We have a lot of books that are up in the 8 and 9 range because I bought them from the original owner, who was a collector who took care of them, and I got them really cheap. This was $10. It's about a 6, and the main problem with it is the back cover is really dirty. I think if I had this pressed and cleaned, it could get up to an 8 maybe, because it's structurally very nice. It's got a couple little scuffs and dings that I think would prevent it from going much higher than that. But it's a really nice book. I paid $10 for this. I also got this copy of 58. Now this is a classic story, where we get the origin of Vision. We also get the origin of Ultron in this story. So it's a key book. This is the one where I have the classic full page of even an android can cry, where he gets inducted into the Avengers and he sheds a single tear. And it also has the classic ending that very Roy Thomas, but very literary for this time period, where he's quoting the poem Ozymandias, where the kid finds Ultron's head in the rubble and it starts kicking around like a soccer ball or whatever. So just an all-time classic issue. This is higher grade. The back cover unfortunately has some silver ink on it, like someone took like a silver Sharpie. I know Sharpies didn't exist yet, but that's what it looks like. Otherwise, it's probably probably an 8 without that, but it does have that, and it's a little bit off white as well. So here's 59. I think I got this from AOK Cards and Comics. It's again, it's a higher grade. It's probably a 6.5 or 7. Awesome colors. First Yellow Jacket. Again, Roy Thomas is just hitting it out of the park. Like issue after issue, we get the first Grim Reaper, the Black Panther joins the team, X-Men crossover, and then we get this two-parter with the first Ultron story. We get this great time travel alternate universe story in the 56 and annual 2. We get the first appearance of Vision in 57 and 58 with his origin, Ultron's origin, and then in 59 and 60 we get Yellow Jacket, and we get the wedding of Hank and Jan. Pretty sure I got this at AOK Cards and Comics, and it was probably $2 or $3. That's what I paid for a lot of stuff from this at that time period. The 60 is one of the first back issues I got. I'm pretty sure I got this one from Same Bat Channel at the same time as I got Avengers number 4. If not the same time, then it was soon after that. There's another issue that I got from Same Bat as well. But there was a point in my collecting where the only back issues I had was like 4 and 60, because I had traded away 36. And so it's kind of a weird checklist. But yeah, so another great Floating Heads cover. This is more of a mid-grade book. Again, solid, maybe a 5. Nice 5. Great story. It's a little bit weird because he has a mental breakdown and she basically tricks him into marrying her before he comes back into his right mind, but okay. 61, awesome double page, 2 splash pages, with the Robert Frost poem. Some say the world under fire, some say in ice, and it's got Immer and Surtur. And this is a crossover again. Roy is writing Doctor Strange at this time, so he has this crossover with Doctor Strange. We get Doctor Strange in his weird superhero outfit with the face mask. Black Knight had been appearing in Doctor Strange at the time, so we get another appearance of Black Knight very early on. He would show up every few months here in Avengers at the beginning. Um, Again, a higher grade copy, you can tell by it's in the Mylar. So um, it's probably a 7.5. Um, Next issue that's taken on more importance in the last couple of years. It's the first appearance of M'Baku, who is really cool in the Marvel movies and Black Panther. Not as cool here, but we get this series of stories from Roy during this period where he's sort of focusing on different members of the team and sort of fleshing out them as characters. So we get the introduction to Vision, so 57, 58 obviously focusing on Vision, and 56 was focusing on Captain America, 59 and 60 focusing on Hank and Jan, 62 we get a Black Panther spotlight where we start to fill in some of his story, because he really only had 2 stories before he joined the Avengers, so he's a lot of blank slate. Roy's got a lot of space to work with, so he's filling in some of that here. We're going to see Roy do a lot of work with him going forward, but he really saves his best work here for Clint Barton. Here's the issue where Clint stops being Hawkeye and becomes Goliath. And this series of issues, several important things happen. He becomes Goliath. We get the new Avengers logo, which doesn't last very long. And the story I've heard is that Stan thought that Giants would sell comics. I think that's why we saw so many previous Goliath appearances. So they thought that Goliath would sell more than Hawkeye. So they decided to keep Clint around, but change his superhero identity. It's an interesting move. I much prefer him as Hawkeye. But in 63, we get that. 64, we actually get an expanded version of Hawkeye's origin where we meet his brother. And this is the first time we actually learn his name. It's really funny. In previous issues where we see him and his girlfriend, Black Widow, alone in their apartment together, she still only calls him Hawkeye. It's not until this comic, several years later, after he joined the team in issue 16, here in 64, we finally get his name. They finally name him Clint Barton in this issue. Nice, solid, mid-grade copy. And again, really nice solid copy here, 65. More of a Clint, I call this the Clint Barton trilogy. 63, 64, and 65 are all Clint Barton spotlights. And in here, we get the Swordsman, who's intimately tied, of course, to Hawkeye's origin, returns, and they have this sort of showdown. And at the end, Clint actually wins by putting together a gigantic makeshift bow. So he still has his Hawkeye skills. He doesn't need to be a giant in order to beat Swordsman, but this is a cool little like mini run within the series. Here's a nice mid-grade copy of 66. Love the cover. This is a key issue for a few reasons. It's got Barry Smith art very early, and he is doing his best Kirby. However, some of the panel layouts and designs are really innovative and weird and interesting. You can see from this just how much potential this guy has. It's great in that sense. There's an awesome panel, like a full page thing with the Vision that's just fantastic, that I'd love to have as a poster. It's also important because it's the first appearance of Adamantium, and it begins a new two-part Ultron storyline, which is absolutely great. Here's the second part. I have a higher grade copy of this. It's probably a 7.5 or 8. One of the best covers in the run in the whole series, I think, is Ultron electrocuting all the Avengers here. Um, great story. It's got one of these classic science fiction endings where Ultron just at the end he can't understand humanity's capacity to love, and he short circuits trying to figure it out. That's how Hank ends up defeating him. Is basically engages his logic circuit, and he can't figure it out, so he dies. Great cover. Now, most of these issues I picked up piecemeal. The ones I'm showing here, um, in the 60s here, most of them I picked up one at a time at different conventions that I was going to, or finally, found it at a different show. One thing I forgot to mention, I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but my copy of 65 is, I got a chance to meet Gene Colan way back in the 90s, and I had him sign the inside of that because there's this really cool 2-page spread by him in there that I really liked. Here's 68, which just like 48 is super high grade, but it has a pop staple. So it's probably an 8.5 or 9, but qualified pop staple. This begins an awesome Kang storyline. Well, no, actually, I'm sorry. I think this is the end of the Ultron storyline, but there's an awesome Kang storyline that begins in the next issue. Probably a 6. Fantastic Kang storyline. This is the last issue with this very short-lived new logo. So we're almost to the point where I started getting comics again from this guy in Boston. Here's number 70. We got the first appearance of the Squadron Sinister, and this is a higher grade copy. It's probably in the 6.5 or 7 range. And then here's a really nice 71. Now, starting with this issue, I'm picking these up from this guy in Boston. These are original owner books. They're not anymore because I own them, but I bought them all from the original owner, and I got most of the issues in the 70s, 80s, and 90s all at once from this guy. And when we get up to the 90s, of course, the Kree-Skrull War and the Neil Adams stuff, that was more expensive. I'll talk about that then. But these issues here between 71 and 91, these like 20 issues, again, I got almost all of them from this guy, and a lot of them are high grade, 7.5, 8, 8.5, even higher. And they were all either $2 or $3, every one of them. So I have a lot of higher grade books that I'm going to show off here. This is, for many years, as long as I've been collecting, even back in the 80s, has been listed like in the price guide as the first appearance of the Invaders. Don't believe that. That's total bullcrap. The first appearance of Invaders is Giant Size Invaders #1. Okay, what happened is that in Invaders Annual #1, they did a story where the Invaders time travel, and they interact with the Avengers in this story from 8 years earlier. And so basically it was a retcon that the people in this story were forming the Invaders at the time or whatever. So in continuity, in Marvel continuity, sort of the first appearance in terms of 1943 or whenever the story is taking place. But yeah, this came the story that established the Invaders being this came out 8 years later. The Invaders did not exist at this time. This is not the first Invaders. Please don't pay a premium because you think it's the first Invaders. Giant Size Invaders #1 is the first Invaders. And all these stories are fantastic, by the way, except for this one's not that great. But that last three-parter with Kang which also had the first appearance of Grandmaster, that's absolutely great. This is a slightly lower grade than some of the others, which you could probably tell because I don't have it in Mylar. But even this isn't low grade. It's a solid, nice mid-grade book that's probably a 5.5 or a 6. And this is kind of tying up some loose ends from like the Nick Fury series, which I think had just been canceled. Here's 73. This is a really cool two-parter. We get the return of the Sons of the Serpent. Great cover. I've got a high-grade copy. Again, this is part of the original owner collection that I got. And this is, again, where Roy is fleshing out the Black Panther. He's taken on like this secret identity. I'm not sure he needs it, but anyway, he's taken on this secret identity where he's become like a high school teacher in Harlem, and he's trying to teach like disadvantaged youth. And anyway, this is all about sort of revealing to the world that Black Panther, under his mask, is black. Now, when he first joined the team in issue 52, his mask was showing part of his face, so I guess they just didn't get any good pictures of him during that point. Here's the second part. Not as big a fan of this cover. The last cover was much cooler. Again, another high grade copy from the original owner run. And this story is really cool. Basically, it's very ahead of its time. It feels very modern because what happens is there are these two talk show hosts, and one's super liberal and the other's super conservative. One's black and the other's white, and they're arguing and they're like stirring up all this hatred on both sides for publicity, basically. And then at the end of the story, it turns out that they're actually both members of the Sons of the Serpent, and they're just drumming up hatred so that they can control the people. I don't want to get political, so I'll just leave it at that. I just thought it as a story, from 1970. It feels very modern today. Now this is slightly lower grade. This is like a 4.5. This is one of the few that I did not get from this guy's collection because I already had it, so I skipped it. This is one of the earliest ones that I got. I got this at Same Bat Channel Comics in Fitchburg, and I got this not too long after I had gotten number 4 and number 60. So again, at one point my checklist was the only ones I had was 4, 60, 75, and then the next issues I had were like in the 200s. Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch return to the team with this issue. They've been gone since issue 49. They come back here, and we get the first appearance of Archon. It's a good story. It's not my favorite, but this issue kind of holds a sentimental value for me because I read it so early on, and yeah. All right, so now we're really getting into the heart of this original owner run. You're going to see a lot of these are in Mylar. They're all high grade, 7.5 to 9 plus, all of them. Got issues 76, the end of the Archon storyline here. '77. I always like this cover. It's a little silly. It's the first appearance of Cornelius Van Lunt, who's a businessman who ends up being a thorn in their side for a little while. And then he reappears later on as a Taurus in the Zodiac. Again, I paid $2 or $3, sometimes $2.50, but between $2 and $3 for all of these. Super high grade. Here's M'Baku. Great colors on this. Like, just tremendous colors. Really sharp books. really cool story with the first Lethal Legion, which are a bunch of, it's like the Masters of Evil, but I guess they decided to call them the Lethal Legion instead, which is, it's fine. It's fine. Um, the Grim Reaper is still wearing a stupid costume here. He does eventually get that cool black costume. It might not be until issue 102. First, Red Wolf. Again, high grade, 8.5, 9. Probably a 9. It's really, really nice. Awesome colors. Underrated book, I think. Original owner collection. Almost all of these are. I think there's one or two of the lower grade ones that he didn't have or I had already. But even these, like 81, you see it's non-mylar because it's lower grade. Well, it's only lower grade compared to these others. It's still part of the original owner collection. This one has a couple like little things. Let me. It's got, I don't know if you can see it up here. It's got a little ding like from a spinner rack, and it's got some scuffing down at the bottom and a little bit of a crease here. It's probably still a 6, maybe a 6.5. I would hesitate to go above that. But that's the case with a lot of these. Like even the lower condition ones from this original owner collection are really nice. Like this copy of 82. I'm not sure why I don't have it in Mylar. It looks like it's probably a 7. I once had this on a fridge magnet that I got at Universal Studios in Orlando around the year 2000. I don't have that anymore. I think they liked it because it said Avengers Assemble. I think it's a weird choice. All the word balloons and daredevils on the cover, but whatever. It was just cool at that time to find any kind of Avengers merchandise because almost nobody in the world cared about Avengers back then. Really nice high grade copy of 83. This is the first appearance of Valkyrie, although it's actually Enchantress. It gets very confusing. This is the Lady Liberators issue, which got a lot of press when it came out. It was featured in like magazines at the time. Were like, look at this, ripped from the headlines. The comics are talking about women's lib. Story is a little, I've heard described as being a little cringy these days, but yeah, it's the first Valkyrie, so it's an important issue. 84, another high grade original owner book, Return of Archon. I've read this run many, many times in my youth, so I'm an old man now. I can't really form any new memories, you know what I mean? But the stuff that I remember from my youth is burned into my brain. That's how I still remember how much I paid for these comics after 30, or more years, more over 30 years. But I have no idea what happens in this. I cannot, like, every time I go through my collection, I'm like, it's got Thor, who's not a regular member of the book at this point, and it's got Archon, Enchantress. It must be following up the events of 83 because she was just in 83, but I don't remember anything about this. This, on the other hand, again, mid-grade, 5.5, 6.5, it's in that range. One of my favorite Avengers covers of all time, and one of my favorite Avengers stories. The first part's a little bit better than the second part. This is the first appearance of the Squadron Supreme, and I think what happens is at the end of the last issue that I don't even remember, when they get beamed back from Archon's world, some of the members of the team, Quicksilver, Vision, and the Scarlet Witch, end up in an alternate Earth where they meet the Squadron Supreme, who are clearly knockoffs of the Justice League, just like the Squadron Sinister was. This is part of an unofficial crossover with Justice League. The The first time it was crossed over into Justice League 74, but the Justice League part was so weak sauce that nobody knew that was even supposed to be happening. It's much more obvious if you read Justice League 89 because it has the same premise where they cross this team called the Assemblers shows up, and they actually ended up having an ongoing presence in Justice League over the years, but not nearly as much as Squadron Supreme. So this is kind of a key book for Squadron Supreme, but also just a great story and an amazing cover. High grade, original owner book. Second part. The second part's not as good as the first part. It's just okay. It's where the teams team up and they beat the bad guy and the Avengers get sent back to their own world. I love the ending of this, where Quicksilver and Vision are talking about the alternate reality stuff, and Vision's like, how do we even know we ended up back on the same Earth we started at? There's really no way to tell. So really cool story. This one's a little bit lower grade. It's probably in the 5.5 range. A minor key, the origin of T'Challa, origin of the Black Panther. So I say minor key. It broke out probably 20, 25 years ago, but I would think these days it would be a much more important book, as it should be. Cool yellow cover. I kind of wish I had a higher grade copy, but that seems like complaining considering how many awesome high grade books I have in this period. So just pretend I didn't say that. '88, nice mid grade, around 6. This is a crossover with the Hulk, and I think it is I think it's the first issue of Avengers that's based in part on a Harlan Ellison plot. He also did the plot for issue 101. I can't stand the Hulk. I don't like the story. It's just an interruption of the Roy Thomas run because I love almost all of his run after issue 52, starting with issue 52. But this one, I just don't like the story. I don't like the Hulk. And it feels particularly out of place considering the next issue begins the Kree Skrull War. First Kree Skrull War, it's not really labeled like that because he was kind of making up as he went. It took a while for, I think, even Roy to realize that he was doing a much longer saga, a high grade copy. He's bringing in Captain Marvel, whose series had been canceled at this point, so he's a bit of a free agent. We're going to see Captain Marvel in the book a few times, but he's in Avengers for the rest of the Kree Skrull War, playing a key role. Really nice copy of 90. It's got a little tiny tear here and a ding, which brings it down a little. Again, it's probably still at least a 7. And just look at the colors on this copy. It just jumps right out. It's just great colors. I feel so fortunate to have gotten all these original owner books when I did. If I had had more money, but I didn't. All right, so here's my 91. This is actually a bit of a lower grade. I should say that when we get to these last few issues here, they started getting more expensive. Not this one, but there's a couple that I just didn't have the money to get them all. So a couple of them I had to just sort of get piecemeal to fill in the holes. Don't really remember if that's what happened here, but this is noticeably lower grade than all the issues around it, so it suggests to me that this might have been one that he didn't have when I bought those books. All right, so here's 92. Classic, awesome Neil Adams cover. He's not doing the interior yet, but just a great cover. Again, a high grade copy from the original owner collection. it's probably an 8.5. Just a great book. I paid $5 for this. It was a little more expensive because we're getting up into the Neil Adams and stuff. Um, 93, not quite as high grade as some of these others. I have this at a 7. It's a square bound. It's always tough. It's got sort of rounded corners, um, and some other stuff like that. You can see it's also not cut very well. It's sort of shifted down. This should be up a little bit so you're not losing the bottom of the words. It doesn't really affect the grade per se. Um, Obviously, one of the most famous issues in the run, because it's got that sequence with Neil Adams drawing Ant-Man going down inside the Vision to try and repair him. Um, so this was $10. This was tied for the most expensive book I bought that day, um, with issue 57, which is also $10. So yeah, um, it's interesting to think about the comparative values and prices because this book has not scaled nearly as well as some of the others in terms of going up in price. There's been sort of a less interest in artist specific stuff like this and much more interest these days in like first appearances and stuff as opposed to storylines. So while this still, it's certainly worth more than $10, there was a lot more interest in the story and the art than basically what's in the book, than there is now. This is a lower grade, 94. It's probably 4.5. Might sneak up into a 5 range, which is too bad because it's got a black frame cover, and you can't really beat black frame covers. I love frame covers, and I love black covers, particularly with the frame. Um, and again, part of the Crease Scroll War. I don't remember where I got this copy. I'm pretty sure it wasn't from the original owner book collection, otherwise it would be higher grade. Like, for instance, this super high grade 95. Now it's got a little bit of a ding there, um, which may have been even like a gripper pull, and that's it. It's really, really, really nice. This is probably the nicest back issue in my collection of Avengers, my Avengers collection. Um, it's hard to say with that little ding. It probably wouldn't be able to go above a 9.2, but it's an absolutely beautiful book. Now my 96 is lower grade. It's only probably it's one of the rougher ones. It's got a roll. It's got a very faint crease down the middle. So it's probably only like a 4. It's one of my favorite covers in the whole series. It's got the first appearance of the classic Avengers logo, which they're still using even on the movies as a version of this. I feel like the book jumped forward 25 years between like issue 91, where we still had the old logo and Sal Buscema's artwork, and now with the new logo and the Neil Adams work. It just looks like a million times more modern. You can see on my copy, I have it autographed here by Neil Adams and here by Roy Thomas. The rule I have is when I go to conventions, I'm a big fan of getting signatures. These days, I originally was getting them when I first started back in the day on the inside of the book mostly, and then I started getting them on the covers for a long time. I'm sort of going back to the inside of the book. I do have a couple really cool comics that are a little more unsightly than I would like because they have black marker scrawled on them. In this case, it's a lower grade book to begin with. And anyway, my rule is whenever I go to a show to get autographs, when I see who's at the show, if they worked on issue of Avengers, then I have to get an Avenger signature first before I do any of their other work. So basically, anyone I've ever met at a show who worked on Avengers, I've gotten their autograph. Um, with Neil Adams, I had him. I don't like to get like have be one of those people that has every book signed and you have to wait an hour because the guy in front of you has a whole suitcase. Plus, Neil Adams charges quite a bit for his autograph, so this is the only Avengers issue I had him sign. And Roy Thomas, since I already had Neil Adams' signature, I had him sign this. I did that with a couple books. I had a number of comics that were signed already by the time I met Roy, and so I had him sign ones that I already had autographed by other people. 97, the end of the Kree-Skrull War. Gil Kane, black frame. It's an unusual frame cover because the frame is actually two different colors. You don't really see that on most frame books from Marvel. Again, original owner, high grade. I forgot to mention, like, these books here, like 95, and this one here, this was a little bit cheaper because it doesn't have the Neil Adams art, but it was more expensive than the other ones. I think more expensive. I think it was $4, and 95 cost me $5. Another high grade book. I'm not sure this is part of the original owner collection. I got to be honest, I don't fully remember this one. Barry Windsor Smith takes over. So we got Neil Adams for 4 issues, 1 issue with Buscema, and then 3 issues with Barry Windsor Smith. So great art for this run of Avengers comics. Really high grade copy of issue 98. I think these are kind of underrated. Again, the artists are not what sell back issues anymore, but these are really great. This was not the first. This is an upgrade. I had a much lower grade copy of 99 originally, and it was bad enough that I wanted to upgrade it. Don't remember how much I paid for this because I don't want to say it's recent. I've had it probably at least 20 years, but I have very strong memories of everything I got, like in the 80s and early 90s. But this was like a rare like late 90s upgrade. So I don't remember what I paid for it. It wasn't a lot. It might have been $10, but it's really nice. It's got a little bit of a thumb bend. A light thumb bend along the side here, like along this edge, and that's about it. It's unusual with the black frame for it to come out this clean, and it's also a little ironic that the only color breaking crease isn't even on the frame. But a really nice high grade book. And lastly, Avengers 100, yellow frame, got the whole squad with a cover by Barry Windsor Smith. Can't beat that. Now, this is from the original owner collection, but it's not as high a grade as the other copies for whatever reason. I don't know if he just read this one a lot more. Maybe there was distribution issues, and so he had to get it secondhand. It's still nice, but it has some faint creasing here from the cover bending over, so it's probably a 5.5, but it looks really nice. This was $10. This was one of the more expensive ones from this collection. So there you have it. Thanks very much for listening. If you've made it this far, or if you're just skipping around, that's totally cool too. There's my Avengers collection, issues 1 through 100. Now I do have the rest of the run. I'm guessing at this point you've probably seen everything you want to see. But if for some reason you want to see more of my Avengers collection, let me know. I can always do more videos showing off more of the Avengers collection. Or if you want to see some of my other runs, let me know if you liked this video. I do have a complete run of Captain America, for instance, including the Tales of Suspense issues. I have a lot of other full runs Most of them are a little bit shorter than that, but I have a lot of full runs of things like Jonah Hex and Weird Western and Warlord and Unknown Soldier. A lot of offbeat titles. I have a complete run of Sergeant Fury that might be interesting. That sort of thing. So let me know what you want to see. If you want to see more videos like this where I just do a deep dive showing off all the books in my collection, and somewhere around here there's buttons to like and to subscribe, and there's a bell you can hit that does something, and either alerts you when there's new video or else it just calls the kids in for dinner. I'm not sure which. And there's more videos here maybe for you to watch. So yeah, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.